probably have a drawer somewhere in your home that tells me more about you than you realize. Not a drawer full of decorative gadgets. A real drawer. Tools with worn handles. A screwdriver with a little bit of paint from a project you finished years ago. An Allen key you somehow kept because, apparently, you are the only person in the house who ever needs it. You've fixed things. You've patched things. You've tightened things. You've sealed things. And somewhere along the way you've become remarkably good at figuring things out. You hear a strange sound coming from the car before anyone sitting beside you even registers that there was a sound. Something breaks at 11 at night. And instead of calling someone, you search for a tutorial, find a flashlight, and decide you'll give it a go. And somehow, it works. You don't tell anyone. Why would you? You've always handled things yourself. And eventually, something rather interesting happens. You don't just become the person who fixes things. You become the person people call when something goes wrong. A broken appliance. A difficult decision. A family problem. A late-night phone call that begins with, "I didn't know who else to ask." And you take the call. Of course you do. You take it the same way you've taken almost everything else in your life. Without hesitation. Without mentioning what it costs you. Even when it costs you quite a lot. So let me ask you something. If you're carrying a washing machine up a staircase and your back suddenly reminds you that this was very obviously designed for 2 people, why is your first instinct to spend 4 minutes calculating whether you can somehow finish the job alone? Why isn't your first thought, "Perhaps I should ask someone for help"? That's the part I find fascinating. Because this goes deeper than stubbornness. Yes, some of it is stubbornness. I'll give you that. But the full explanation is considerably more uncomfortable. There is a particular kind of person who learns, often very early in life, that the safest way to get something done is to do it themselves. Sometimes the reason is obvious. The adults around them were absent, overwhelmed, unreliable, too busy dealing with their own problems. But sometimes it wasn't anything dramatic. Sometimes it was simply one small moment. You reached for help, and the help didn't quite reach back. A parent was too exhausted to notice. A household was already carrying so much that asking for one more thing felt like placing another weight on an already overloaded shell. Maybe you learned that asking questions made things more complicated. Maybe you learned that needing something created tension. And children are remarkably good observers. They don't need someone to explain the rules. They watch. They notice. They adapt. And somewhere along the way you became the person who figures things out. Now, if you grow up in a culture that places a high value on self-sufficiency, that lesson can become even stronger. There is a familiar message in many English-speaking cultures. Be independent. Pull your own weight. Handle your business. Don't make a fuss. Don't be a burden. Those sound like reasonable values. And they can be. Independence is useful. Responsibility is useful. Being capable is useful. The problem begins when a useful value quietly becomes a rule you are no longer allowed to break. You don't simply prefer doing things yourself. You feel that you should. And there is a difference. Because adaptations that are formed early in life don't automatically disappear when the original circumstances change. The situation changes. You grow up. You get a job. You build relationships. You become capable. But the old rule can remain. Don't need too much. Don't ask too much. Don't make things harder for other people. Figure it out. Handle it. Keep going. And eventually, that rule stops feeling like a rule. It starts feeling like personality. This is just who I am. Perhaps you're 37. Perhaps you're 52. And objectively speaking, you're good at what you do. You've earned that competence. You know how to solve problems. People trust you. You're the one they call. And slowly, almost without noticing, your identity gets built around competence. The quiet story you tell yourself becomes, I am the capable one. I am the reliable one. I don't need rescuing. I solve problems. Other people may need help. I don't. And now, we reach the uncomfortable part. Asking for help doesn't simply feel inconvenient. It can feel like a crack in the foundation. Because if your identity has been built around being the person who handles things, then needing someone else creates a strange psychological contradiction. For a moment, you aren't the capable one. You're the person who doesn't know. The person who can't do it alone. The person who needs something. And that experience is precisely the experience you've trained yourself to escape as quickly as possible. This is why the discomfort can feel surprisingly physical. You might recognize it. Someone says, "Do you want some help?" And almost immediately, your body responds before your brain has finished thinking. No, I've got it. You don't even know why you said it. You just did. Psychologists Francis Flynn and Vanessa Lake found something fascinating in research conducted at Stanford in 2008. People systematically underestimated how willing other people would be to help them. In other words, people expected less generosity from others than they actually received. The world was often more helpful than people imagined it would be. And that gives us an important distinction. The problem isn't always whether help is available. The problem can be the internal cost of asking for it. You're not only calculating, will this person help me? You're also calculating, what does it say about me if I need them? And for someone whose identity is built around competence, that second question can be much heavier. People who are good at fixing things often develop what I would call a physical relationship with competence. There is a particular satisfaction in finding the fault in a system and making it work again. You identify the problem. You understand it. You solve it. And suddenly the thing that was broken is working. That's not necessarily vanity. Most capable people aren't doing these things for applause. It is more private than that. It feels like evidence. Every repaired object becomes a tiny piece of evidence saying, see, I can handle things. I know what I'm doing. I'm useful. And once competence becomes evidence of your worth, failure becomes strangely expensive. A problem you can't solve isn't simply a problem anymore. It can feel like evidence for the opposite story. Maybe I'm not as capable as I thought. Maybe I should have known. Maybe I should have figured this out. And the brain doesn't particularly enjoy evidence that contradicts the identity it has built. But the deeper layer isn't really about tools. It's emotional. Think about the person who remains calm during every crisis. Someone panics. You make a plan. Someone is overwhelmed. You organize the next step. Someone calls you late at night and says they don't know what to do. You listen. You think. You solve. You're remarkably good at receiving someone else's chaos and turning it into something manageable. But then someone tries to do the same thing for you. They sit beside you. They ask how you're doing. They tell you that you don't have to handle everything alone. And suddenly, you become uncomfortable. You say, I'm fine. Or, I've already thought about it. Or, I know what I'm going to do. Notice what just happened. They offered emotional support. You returned a solution. That's a very different thing. Some people are incredibly comfortable being useful and deeply uncomfortable being cared for. They know how to give support. They don't know what to do with it when it comes toward them. And underneath that, there can be an even quieter belief. Needing help is a burden. Showing up with an unfinished problem means taking something away from someone else. That belief doesn't appear out of nowhere. Maybe you watched a parent constantly stretch themselves beyond their limits. Maybe you learned to read the room before asking for anything. Maybe you became the child who noticed when everyone else was tired. So you adjusted. You needed less. You asked for less. You became easier to manage. And perhaps people praised you for it. You've always been so independent. You never caused trouble. You've always been mature for your age. Those sound like compliments. And perhaps they were meant as compliments. but a child can sometimes hear something underneath them. People like me, when I don't need much. So you learn not to need much. And eventually, needing nothing becomes something you are proud of, until you discover that pride has a price. Because here's the strange part. People who fix everything are usually exceptionally good at helping other people. They show up. They bring the tools. Sometimes literally. Sometimes emotionally. They stay late. They solve the problem. They make things easier. And they would never want another person to feel ashamed for asking them for help. In fact, they might be genuinely offended if you suggested that helping you is a burden. And yet, they can be completely convinced that asking for help themselves would be exactly that, a burden. This is one of the contradictions that makes hyper-independence so difficult to see from the inside. You believe in generosity when you're the giver. You doubt it when you're the receiver. You believe other people deserve support. You quietly exclude yourself from the same rule. And if something in this has been making you slightly uncomfortable, there's a reason. Perhaps you've recognized yourself. Perhaps you've recognized someone you know. The person who says they're fine while clearly carrying too much. The person who would drive across town at midnight to help a friend, but would rather struggle alone than ask that same friend for 10 minutes of their time. The person who will spend an entire weekend helping someone move house, but won't admit that they're exhausted. The person who knows exactly what everyone else needs, and has absolutely no idea how to answer the question, what do you need? That's not necessarily arrogance, and it isn't necessarily strength. Sometimes it's simply a very old habit that became incredibly good at disguising itself as strength. And no, the solution isn't simply learn to ask for help. That's about as useful as telling someone who's afraid of heights, just relax and look down. The real change is slower and stranger. You have to update the story you have been telling yourself about what asking means. Not perform vulnerability. Not suddenly become someone who tells everyone everything. Just begin considering a possibility that may feel completely foreign. Needing someone doesn't dismantle you. It doesn't erase your competence. It doesn't make you weak. And the people in your life aren't there only to receive what you can give them. A relationship in which one person always gives and the other always receives isn't necessarily a strong relationship. Sometimes strength is allowing the exchange to go in the other direction. Some of the most capable people I have ever encountered live with a quiet absence of being helped. The interesting thing is that they may not even recognize it as an absence. They've adapted so completely that it feels normal. It feels like personality. It feels like, that's just me. Perhaps it is. Perhaps you're always going to be someone who enjoys solving problems. Perhaps you'll always be the person who knows which tool to reach for. Perhaps your friends will always call you when something breaks. There's nothing wrong with that. The goal isn't to destroy the part of you that is capable. The goal is to stop confusing capability with obligation. You can be strong without always carrying everything. You can be reliable without being permanently available. You can be independent without making yourself emotionally unreachable. And you can help people without making yourself responsible for everyone. That's a much healthier kind of independence. So perhaps the next time something goes wrong, try something very small. Not a dramatic confession. Not a complete personality transformation. Just one sentence. I could use some help with this. And then, notice what happens inside you. Notice the urge to immediately take it back. Notice the thought that says, it's fine, I'll do it. Notice the discomfort. Don't fight it. Just observe it. Because that discomfort may not be telling you that asking for help is wrong. It may simply be telling you that asking for help is unfamiliar. There's a difference. Your nervous system can mistake unfamiliarity for danger. But unfamiliar doesn't mean dangerous. Sometimes it simply means you've never practiced this before. And perhaps this is the part worth remembering. You don't have to stop being the person who fixes things. Keep the toolbox. Keep the worn screwdriver. Keep the ridiculous collection of Allen keys. Keep being the person who notices the strange sound in the car. Keep showing up when people need you. Those parts of you are real. They are valuable. They were built through years of experience, adaptation, and effort. But you don't have to prove your worth every time something goes wrong. You don't have to earn your place in someone's life by being useful. You don't have to make yourself indispensable before you allow yourself to belong. And you certainly don't have to carry everything simply because you've become very good at carrying things. Because there is a difference between, I can do this myself, and I have to do this myself. The first is capability. The second is a cage. And here's the image I'd like to leave you with. You've spent years holding the wrench. You've fixed the loose handle. You've tightened the screw. You've repaired the broken thing. You've carried the heavy box. You've taken the late night call. You've been the person other people could lean on. And perhaps you've forgotten that you are allowed to lean too. Not because you're incapable. Not because someone has to rescue you. And not because you suddenly need to become dependent on everyone around you. Simply because relationships are supposed to work in more than one direction. Sometimes you hold the wrench. Sometimes someone else does. Sometimes you're the one who knows what to do. Sometimes you say, I don't know. Sometimes you're the person who shows up. And sometimes you let someone show up for you. So the next time your first instinct is to say, I've got it. Pause for a second. Maybe you do have it. Maybe you genuinely can handle it. But ask yourself one more question. Do I actually want to handle this alone? Because those are not the same question. You can be capable and still accept help. You can be independent and still need people. You can be the fixer and still have moments when something inside you needs fixing. And perhaps that's the real shift. Not becoming someone who asks for help all the time. Just becoming someone who knows that help is available and doesn't automatically turn away from it. Because the goal was never to put the wrench down forever. It's simply to remember that you don't have to hold it every single time. And if you've recognized yourself somewhere in this story, I'd like you to do something very simple. Head over to the community section of the channel and take a look at the poll. Answer honestly. Are you usually the person who asks for help when you need it? Or are you almost always the person who says, I've got it? Look at how other people answered too. You may be surprised by how many people are carrying the same invisible rule. Sometimes the simplest question can reveal something we've never admitted about ourselves. Until next time, keep fixing what needs fixing. But remember to leave a little room for someone else to help you hold the wrench. Uncle Theo.